Hi, it's Mat McLachlan with a special invitation. If you'd like to join me and my team of outstanding historians to walk the ground where these videos were made, visit our website and join one of our battlefield tours. That's battlefields.com.au. Enjoy the video. It's Mat McLachlan. It's time for another History in 6 items. Today, we're at the Guards Museum in London, and we're going to tell the story of the Battle of Waterloo. Lee, the Guards regiments have a very proud history, but one of their defining encounters was definitely Waterloo.
Indeed.
Tell us a little bit about what the Guards achieved during the Battle of Waterloo.
Well, at Waterloo, we had the 3 regiments that were in existence at that point, the 1st and 2nd Regiment of Foot Guards and the 3rd Regiment. They were to go on to become the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards and Scots Guards respectively. There were 2 types of guards units there. There was the light companies and the standard units. The light companies were placed in a series of fortified buildings in the valley at Waterloo, one of which is the famous Hougoumont Chateau. And these were called farms by the soldiers because they were really medieval farms. Thick walls, easy to defend. Think of a bunker on D-Day, basically. Wellington put the guys in there. The second involvement was that the bulk of the brigades were kept on the ridge line. That division was the division that defeated Napoleon's final column charge at the end of the day, wiped them out and started to sweep them off the field. So the Guards were involved in those 2 key areas of Waterloo.
So pretty significant contribution. And
absolutely.
And here at the Guards Museum, you've got some quite impressive display of relics from not just Waterloo, but also the Napoleonic Wars. We're going to look at a couple of things that tell that story. Let's start with, as you said, Hougoumont Farm.
Yeah.
We've got some relics here from the farm.
So Hougoumont Farm itself was a large farmhouse with thick walls. The brigades the light companies were placed in there. And Wellington basically said, you're on your own all day, hold up the French, be a thorn in their side, enfilade them as they come past. And we've got some artifacts here taken from that farm. And on this one, we have one of the locks for the big barn doors. And you can see that round hole made in it. That's likely to be case fire, shrapnel rounds from a French cannon. And then we've got the smaller ball holes from the musket balls on a section of the gate here. This material at the top is a blackened timber frame because at key parts of the battle, large buildings within the complex were actually on fire. And our troops were fighting on one floor while the other floor was actually on fire.
And you've got the model here showing the fighting in the courtyard outside the farm. Now, my accounts that I've read of Waterloo, this is some of the most terrifying close quarter, hand-to-hand actions that took place. Just paint us a little bit of a picture of what that was like for the men who were fighting.
In the chaos of the battle, they had to keep gates open and closed to allow supplies in. And at one point, the French forced open the gates into Hougoumont. About 50 or 100 burst in, and this is a very confined space. There was a very bloody hand-to-hand battle here. This is real close quarters stuff, bayonets, axes, knives, everything was used here. They finally killed and captured the French at this point and ejected them and slammed the doors again. And this is the famous closing of the gates at Hougoumont, which is depicted on many of the artworks and is depicted here in our model. One of the only survivors credited from that was a French drummer boy who was left inside the castle, the chateau, after the French had been thrown out. And he must have been terrified. But he was taken to one side and looked after by the British soldiers. So I'm assuming he was a little teenage drummer boy. No threat to them whatsoever.
We just talked about the nature of this close quarter fighting, and the next item or group of items we're going to look at is just to the left here. We've got weapons that were used at Waterloo, and obviously, famously, the brown Bess, the musket that was commonly used. But I notice also here, Lee, we've got edged weapons. We've got weapons that wouldn't have been out of place during the Civil War or on a medieval battlefield.
Absolutely.
Just tell me, this might be an ignorant question, but we've got old and modern here depicted in these weapons. Were these weapons swords, pikes, other bladed weapons? Were they actually used at Waterloo, or were they simply carried ceremonially? Was it all done with modern weapons like muskets and rifles?
There was still an era of transition. By now, the British Army the line regiments and the foot guards particularly were infantry soldiers armed with the musket. That is true. But other troops, the officers particularly, would have still had their swords, and that would have been their primary weapon. Across here we've got officers' pistols. In those days, officers bought their own secondary armament. In this case, they'd go to their gunsmith and he would make them a pair of, in this case, percussion pistols. They'd carry one or two of them, single shot, so the more pistols you can carry, the better, and this would be their last-ditch weapon. But typically an officer leading his men from the front, as they would do, would draw his sword and charge forward with it. Very much their weapon of choice. Down here, the long weapon is the half-pike or spontoon. This was used in the 1700s by sergeants as a badge of rank and originally evolving, as you can see, from a pike. But it had the function, among others, of tapping down the barrels of the muskets to ensure that they would fire level. Leaning back against this long barrel, soldiers would lean back and fire too high. Pretty much by the period of Waterloo, this was more of a ceremonial weapon. It was being carried as a badge of rank, and they were soon out of use by the 1830s. So this very much archaic by now, I would say.
And we hear, of course, about the cavalry charges and obviously swords and lances.
Indeed,
yeah. That is the bread and butter. You're not going to be charging down lines of troops, waving your musket in the air. You're going to be hacking down. I mean, it's horrific, isn't it, to think about exactly what went on there. But as you said, this was a real transition period. You know, we're talking early 19th century. We're talking much broader use of firearms, and firearms that could be used much more effectively.
Yep.
And also bladed weapons still being found on the battlefield.
And don't forget, guys are fighting in the open in line. They're standing in the open in lines, 200 or 300 yards away from the enemy, exchanging musket fire. They're getting cannon rounds coming into them, canister fire, that kind of thing. And this just makes it incredibly bloody and close quarters.
I think it's great that they're displayed here all together because it does paint that entire picture.
It does.
Something else that paints the picture is you have a map of the battlefield. Our next item is obviously a very old map of the battlefield. I'm assuming not done at the time of Waterloo.
We suspect not. Potentially a souvenir item, something like that. The interesting thing about Waterloo is that Wellington, the general, had mapped the area. He was a great tactician, and a great tactician knows the landscape. In passing through this area earlier, having occupied the area after Napoleon's first defeat, he noticed this area and made a brief note of how he would fight a battle here. And supposedly that is why he was so pleased that he managed to get an opportunity in 1815 to intercept Napoleon on his way from Paris to Brussels in this area of Waterloo, which was the main road. And so many people think he had the whole battle planned 6 months in advance. Did it go to plan? Who knows? But he certainly knew the area, that's for sure.
How much of a role did the terrain play in the success of the Allies at Waterloo?
It was crucial because Wellington placed his troops on a ridgeline at the British end of the area. And most of the troops were down below the ridgeline level, so they couldn't be seen and they couldn't be shot at. Napoleon apparently had no idea how big the army was. He thought he defeated most of the army a couple of days before at Quatre Bras, didn't really know how many Wellington had. So they were hidden and they were out of sight. The valley itself, the lower area, is where these farmhouses were dotted around, including Hougoumont and Hay-Saint. And these were the thorns in the side. So it was a well planned out tactical battle. And it kind of went exactly how he's expected it to.
The important question about this map is, are the Prussians depicted on the map, or is it simply the British?
They're off here somewhere and arriving at the last minute. As we know now, Napoleon had one eye on the battlefield and one eye on the neighbouring fields. This is a battle order for the British Army, as we were. And it includes Hougoumont right down in the centre. And you can see that it's right out the front, exposed, in the middle of the French lines of advance, cut off. I wouldn't want to be stationed in there that day.
Horrific
That's for sure.
fighting. And
Yeah.
we should also note that a lock of hair from, I think it's from Wellington's horse.
One of Wellington's chargers, yes.
I'm going to say Wellington's horse must have been bald by the in the years.
There's a lot of
many people that say they have a lock of hair,
and even a fair number of hooves of horses as well. So who knows how many he had? He was such an important figure that this was the kind of souvenir people had at the time, and so it's no surprise that this potential souvenir map or commemorative map has what's said to be some of his horse's hair attached to it.
This sums up what Wellington was doing on the battlefield, but we can't obviously talk about the Battle of Waterloo without talking about Wellington's opposite number, Napoleon. And there's a couple of relics down in the corner here that touch on his story on the battlefield as well, aren't they?
Indeed. So if we have a look at these are the gateposts from Napoleon's headquarters, taken after the battlefield as soldiers at the end of a battlefield. Well, they like to take their souvenirs. These guys must have had a cart because these are heavy items. Amazingly, they still have lichen on them, so where they were in the intervening period. But Napoleon had his headquarters on the other side of the valley looking across. Of course, his troops and Wellington's had faced each other so many times, but Wellington and Napoleon had never met on the battlefield. So we have Wellington in his house at one end, and at the other end, the quarters for Napoleon. Napoleon wakes up that morning. He knows it's been raining the night before. He sits down for a conference with his leaders and his generals, and they explain that the ground is so wet. Could he just hold off some time? Being an artillery expert, he knows that if he fires these cannons earlier on, before the ground is dry, they're just going to dig into the mud. And so he has to delay the start of the battle. And he ends up pacing up and down through his headquarters.
In your opinion, we know that Waterloo was Napoleon's downfall. How did Napoleon perform at the Battle of Waterloo?
Generally, not at his best. He was ill, he was exhausted, he had suffered a year in exile, he'd come back. Many people were saying that he'd pulled the army together. Some of the generals had switched sides several times and he didn't trust them. He gave contradictory orders. He gave orders that could be interpreted. He sent one army off. He thought they were going one way. They thought they were going the other way. This was not his best work. And although he had loyal men, loyal troops, he was facing Wellington, who was argumentatively at his best. This was staff work, planning. This is what Wellington did. Napoleon, by now, this was an off day for him, basically.
Lee, at this time of the Napoleon Wars, we had Nelson, who was obviously a great hero. It was a time when Britain really embraced its heroes, didn't they? Because after his huge success at Waterloo, Wellington was feted by the British public as well. Just tell us about Wellington's life and successes after the Battle of Waterloo.
Well, he was immediately granted by a grateful nation the estate in Stratfield-Say, which was his seat that he adopted. And when you are given an estate or property by the state or the crown, the deal is that once a year you thank them by paying a token rent. It's called quit rent. And in this case, it's a banner which is presented to the royal family by the owner of the estate, so his descendants. And on this one here from 1984, you can see that it looks like a French flag. Red, white and blue with an eagle on the top. And this is, of course, to commemorate the very reason that he had that property and to once again pick out his key moment, of course, Battle of Waterloo, defeating the French flag and the eagle on the top.
So even 2 centuries later, effectively the fans are still thumbing their nose at the French who were defeated on the field of Waterloo.
And would still be so. And these quit rent banners, and including ones for Marlborough, for Blenheim Palace, are all loaded with symbolism. And this one it's pretty in your face what this is about.
I do love that because it would be easy to walk past this and not appreciate the significance.
Yeah.
But it's these small elements of the story that really bring the history to life. Indeed. Centuries later, there are still systems in place to remind the French of what happened on that field at Waterloo.
We're very good at that, yes.
Well, I do have to say, we're in the Guards Museum. Nothing symbolises the Guards more than the bearskin hat. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me that even that is a representation of the victory of the British over the French at Waterloo. We have a bearskin hat just here as our final item. Tell me the wonderful history of the bearskin.
Well, this is why this is such an enduring symbol for the foot guards. The bearskin hat directly links back to Waterloo because at Waterloo itself, the British Army was fighting not in bearskins, but in leather caps called shakos and other headwear. It's the French Imperial Guard that we defeat at the end of the battle that are wearing the bearskin caps. And it's such an iconic symbol that the king, to celebrate the victory, decrees that his 1st Regiment of Guards adopt that French headdress. And that's when they start wearing the bearskin cap. Slightly different form as we see today. This one here is from His Royal Highness the Duke of York, about 1827. First the Guards adopt it, the 1st Regiment of Guards, and then the other 2 regiments adopt it within a few years. At the same time, the King decrees that the 1st Regiment of Guards adopts the French name of the unit they defeated, Grenadiers. And so we have the Grenadier Guards wearing French bearskin caps, all as a direct link back to that one-day battle at Waterloo.
So we've got flags, we've got caps, we've got emblems. Is there any suggestion of what the French think about this in the modern era, that even a couple of centuries later we're still rubbing their noses in the defeat at Waterloo?
Well, that does happen quite a lot. One wonders what a French president would think inspecting a guard of honour in bearskin caps of the Grenadier Guards. The French still wear the bearskin cap for some of their ceremonial units, so whether the two would ever get together, they would have a bearskin face-off. Who knows what would happen there? But that's such an iconic symbol. Because it's a battle trophy, the Guards will continue to wear it this day, even though, of course, it's no longer a practical piece of headwear for combat.
Well, it's a wonderful piece of history and it's a wonderful collection that tells this story. So thank you so much for showing us, Lee.
It's been my pleasure to show you around.